Hello there, and welcome back to the second PowerPoint of on monopolistic competition. Remember last time round we looked at some of the principles and characteristics of monopolistic competition, and we also did touch on the implications. Well, I'm just going to run through the implications again, just as a reminder, because we're then going to look at both short run and long run monopolistic competitive markets, and the scenario in terms of profits and losses, etc., in the same way as we did, or similar to what we did with perfect competition. So if you just bear with me, we'll just run through that in the first instance, and hopefully that will give some context. Remember, we talked about the implications of monopolistic competition last time around. I'm just going to reiterate those because it's quite important in terms of the implications that it has for the way in which these particular markets might work. Okay, so we've talked about in monopolistic competition that there is some element of differentiation. So a product can be differentiated, and that does give some market power. So firms can actually build up brand loyalty using advertising to support that whole process. That effectively means that they could raise prices without losing customers. And in that instance, clearly they might choose to do that if they've got a sufficiently differentiated product from other close substitutes. That is going to then mean that people will decide to still buy their product as opposed to change to a substitute. We've said in this instance that effectively we're not price takers. So in this instance, we've got a demand curve that is downward sloping. So effectively, the price that we charge will have an influence on the amount that is being bought, the quantity that's being bought. However, in this instance, where we're talking about monopolistic competition, because we've got a large number of firms that all produce relatively close substitutes, we said before that they are different, but not hugely different. Okay, they're not big enough. The firms aren't big enough, or don't have a sufficiently strong or dominant position to make a sufficiently different product, if you like. And so, as a result of that, the price elasticity of demand is going to be relatively elastic. Okay, but that's clearly going to depend on things like brand loyalty. Okay, so we can say that in this instance, if we did make a big price change, then that effectively could significantly affect our demand for the demand for this particular product. Now, the other thing that we need to bear in mind is that marginal revenue will fall twice as steeply as average revenue or demand curve. Now, this is quite a tough mathematical principle that if you do want to look into it in a bit more detail, then by all means do. There is a YouTube link there which goes to Econs plus Dahl, and he explains in quite a lot of detail the mathematical principles behind the reasons for that. To be honest, you're not going to be tested on that, but I know one or two of you are pretty serious mathematicians, and you might want to be able to prove it in your own mind in terms of the mathematical principles behind it. So by all means, knock yourself out if you want to go and take a look at that. Okay, so let's take a look then at the way in which we might represent these scenarios, different scenarios, both in the short run and the long run, as far as monopolistic competition is concerned. Now we're going to start here, where effectively we're going to look at the short run in the first instance, and that is on page 29 in your booklet, and then we'll look at the long run scenario on page 30. Now, as you'll see, as we build this example up, we're going to do it on the same diagram. Now that might sound, you might think, what the hell are you doing that for? But what I'll do is I'll try and explain to you when I want you to stop drawing on the page 29 axis, and when I want you to start looking at the page 30 axis. So we're going to look at the short run scenario in the first case, and then we're going to look at long run equilibrium, and that's over the course of these two items, both page 29 and page 30. So let's take a look at the things that we need to include, and we'll also look at whether this particular type of market competition or market structure, monopolistic competition, is efficient in both a productive and an allocative way. Okay, now as we'll see, may not be any great surprise to you, but in fact monopolistic competition is neither of those, as we'll see. So we're going to plot cost and revenue against quantity or output as per normal. And in this instance, we're going to draw in a couple of things. Okay, the first thing is we're going to draw in our average revenue curve, which is a downward sloping demand curve. And also, as we can see here, this is the short run position. Okay, so effectively, anything that we talk about which shows the short run, where you will be drawing onto your diagram or your axes on page 29. Okay, so that's one significant difference from perfectly competitive scenarios, because clearly our average revenue, marginal revenue, and demand curve were horizontal, weren't they? So that's one significant difference. Now, the reason we mentioned previously that the marginal revenue in the short run is actually twice the gradient of the average revenue. And again, if you want that proven to you in terms of mathematics behind it, then please go and take a look at the link that I pointed you to on the last slide. Then we've got our marginal cost curve coming in. Okay. And in this instance, obviously, we can see that if we're talking about in the short run, marginal cost and marginal revenue, where those are equal, is our profit maximizing point. So here we have that point here. Okay, now, as we'll see, we'll add some more detail in as we go. So clearly, in this case, our quantity in the short run would be at our profit maximizing point. That's the amount we would produce. Okay. Now, you can also see in this scenario that actually the point at which marginal cost and marginal revenue equal are at equilibrium. That's our profit maximization point. Okay. You can see also that in this instance, at that point, our average revenue is significantly higher than our marginal cost. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So the price that we're likely to charge in the short run, okay, again, these subscripts are actually suggesting that this is all to do with short run, okay, would be P. Okay, so you can see the price that we would charge would be where we are able to produce that level of output, and the amount of the average revenue is going to be like so. I'm going to remove that for a minute just to make it slightly more straightforward. Okay, now, so we're in a position where we can see that we are hopefully in a situation where we're going to be able to make some profit in this position. And when we draw in our average cost curve, okay, you can still see that there is a position where we are clearly our average revenue is significantly higher than our average cost curve at this particular point. So if we then draw in the next element, okay, we can see that our average cost in the short run at profit maximizing quantity in the short run is at this point here. Now you can see that our average cost and effectively the price that we're charging, we're actually in the short run achieving some profits, well, supernormal profits, as we'll see. Okay, so we can see the supernormal profits is the box that is shown by A, B, C, and E. The reason we haven't included D is because we've got another D down here for demand, and we didn't want to confuse you. So that area there, A, B, C, E, is our supernormal profits. Okay, so that's the point at which our average revenue is significantly higher than our average cost. So we're going to achieve supernormal profits. Okay. So there we go. So A, B, C is our area of in the short run, supernormal profit. Okay. Now that is pretty much what I need you to draw on the first axis on page 29. Okay, and then we're going to look at how that basically then changes. Okay, remember we've said that supernormal profits might be possible in the short run, but effectively, if we have supernormal profits, that's going to attract new entrants into the market, isn't it? There's low barriers to entry, as we mentioned, and also clearly other businesses are going to think, well, gosh, these guys are making supernormal profits because of the perfect knowledge in the market. Okay, they are going to know that, and as a result, they will dive in with the hope that they might be able to achieve some profit themselves. Okay, now, if we then take a look at the next stage In the short run, we could, in a different scenario, we could be in a position where we were making losses rather than supernormal profits. But in that situation, in the short run, if losses were being made, then the likelihood is that firms would then exit that industry. Remember, if we said tends to be a shutdown point where if we're below our average variable cost, we would choose maybe even in the short run to move out of the market. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense so far. Now, what we're going to do now is look at what happens in the long run. Okay, we've got to a position where in the short run we've achieved these supernormal profits, but in the long run this scenario is going to change somewhat, okay, because there are no barriers to entry, as we've mentioned, and new firms will continue to come into that market until no supernormal profits are made. Remember, this is in theory, okay. So in that scenario, let's take a look at how that might change, okay. And to some degree, what will happen in this instance, we will get to the point where if no supernormal profits are being made, then that's the point at which average cost is going to equal average revenue, okay. And that will be equilibrium level. That would be at the point where we have the equilibrium level of output and only normal profits would be made, okay. And in that case, we'll demonstrate this by taking what we've got already, taking some of that stuff off, as we'll see in a minute, and then showing how in the long run supernormal profits tend to get competed away into long run normal profits. Okay, so bear with me now. As you'll see in a minute, you might not want to add this onto the same diagram, but you'll see in a minute that the diagram changes significantly. Okay, so we're going to add some stuff and take some stuff off this diagram to demonstrate the next point. So at this point then, okay, now effectively, remember, if we're talking about productive efficiency, and with something that we haven't talked about a huge amount yet, but productive efficiency is the point at which we are performing at our lowest average cost. Okay, now you can see that in this situation, given where we are at the moment in the short run, then actually we are not performing at our lowest possible average cost, and so as a result of that, we are not being productively efficient. Okay, now if we take a look at the next point then, in terms of whether we're being allocatively efficient or not, we are also not being allocatively efficient, because remember, to be allocatively efficient, that's really where there are only normal profits being made. So that's where effectively we're giving maximum utility to our consumer, but also we are producing at a sensible level of cost too. So that's the point at which average revenue would equal average cost. Okay, and in that scenario, obviously we would be in a position where we're making normal profits. Okay, and we're at break-even point, if you like, if we're talking from an accounting standpoint. Okay, so let's take a look at the changes that might happen when we move into the long run then. So we're going to start in the first instance, we're going to shift and pivot our average revenue, okay, to a long run position, okay. So that's basically drawn in there like so. Now that starts to look a little bit confusing, doesn't it? But average revenue in the long run is going to change, and it's changed to the point that we're showing here. So there's been a shift and a pivot as far as the average revenue curve is concerned. Okay, now the marginal revenue in the long run, remember, it's going to have the same scenario where you've got twice the gradient of AR in the as well. So that effectively becomes the new position, okay, for marginal revenue. Now, if we take away the short run average revenue curve and also the short run marginal revenue, we've got a new position where in this instance we have a point where we've got average revenue being equal to average cost. Okay, now if we just take some of these other scenarios away, it starts to hopefully make a little bit more sense. Okay, so at this point, we can see that our quantity at the point of profit maximisation, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, is basically at the price in the long run, which equals our average cost in the long run. Okay, so we can see that our average revenue equals our average cost, and that would be the point at which we would be performing if we were achieving normal profits, i.e. average cost equaling average revenue. So at this point in the long run, we're only achieving this term of normal profits, essentially the point at which average cost equals average revenue. So in the long run, are we being productively efficient? Well, no, because again, we're not producing at our lowest average cost. Are we being allocatively efficient in this scenario? No, we're not, because again, we are not actually providing the maximum utility to our consumer at the same time as producing at the lowest possible cost. So in this instance, although in monopolistic competition you would have this shift, okay, that's basically not going to give you either productive or allocative efficiency. Okay, now as we mentioned before, the only markets in which you can achieve this are perfectly competitive markets, and we'll come back to that and look at that in summary at a later stage. Okay, so hopefully that makes a reasonable amount of sense. And now we'll look at a couple of questions, and then we'll move on and take a look at an article that I'd like you to have a read of and answer some questions on too in your booklet. So we're now going to look at page 31. Move on to page 31. Okay, so before we do that, let's look at some of the short run and long run implications. Then we've talked about that. We've shown that really in the graph there, in the two graphs, or the one graph that we drew, but that you split down into two on page 29 and page 30 in your CC5A booklets. So let's have a look at the short run implications then. Okay, remember we said that supernormal profits are possible in the short run in monopolistically competitive markets, but they will, without question, they will attract new entrants into the market. Losses could be possible in the short run, but then if that is the case, then dependent on levels of average cost and average revenue, if that is the case, if losses are possible in the short run, then firms will simply choose to exit the industry. Remember, there are low barriers to entry and exit, so firms would choose to leave the market. If we then look at the long run then, okay, because we've got no barriers to entry, new firms will continue to come into the market until no supernormal profits can be made. So the point at which average cost equals average revenue is the point at which in the long run the market would find its equilibrium. Okay, so that would be where only normal profits are made. Okay, effectively competition coming into the market will compete away the supernormal profits that were being made. Okay, let's take a look at in this case the first multi-choice question, and this is on page 31. Looks like we've got a bit of a problem with that should be page 31 rather than page 31, but anyway, so in this case the question is, which of the following markets has characteristics closest to the model of monopolistic competition? And we've got the option of household water supply, rail services, banking services, window cleaning services, and supermarkets. So which one do we think that is likely to be then? And in this case, the response is actually D, because there are relatively low barriers to entry and exit. Okay, so that clearly is one of the things that we talked about as far as monopolistic competition was concerned. So let's look at the second question then. So minicab taxi firms are best described by the model of monopolistic competition. Which of the following will be true for such firms in long run equilibrium? Okay, so we've talked about this. We've run through this principle of productive efficiency and whether we're going to make profit or a particular type of profit, and also the types of product that we're talking about in a monopolistic scenario. Okay, well, we know that monopolistically competitive markets tend to have differentiated products. So clearly that's going to mean that the answer can't be A and the answer can't be C, because both of those are saying homogeneous products. Okay, so process of elimination, we can forget about A and D. Okay, so it's either going to be B, C, or E as the answer. Now, in this instance, it's actually going to be B. Why is it going to be B? Well, effectively, if we're talking about productive efficiency, we're not productively efficient, as we've explained in monopolistic competition, and it may well be that we're actually achieving normal profits. Okay, so the reason for that then is you produce on the downward sloping section of the AC curve, but it's not at the minimum point. Okay, and so as a result of that, we're not achieving productive efficiency. Other reasons, there are low barriers to entry, and it could be that there is this term known as hit and run entry, where businesses might think, oh, there's some profit to be made here. We'll step into the market, we'll see if we can make some profit, and then we'll step out again. So that is another reason why it would have been B. Okay, the third example is that it's only a slightly differentiated product, isn't it? One taxi firm or one window cleaning firm is going to be, sorry, window cleaning was on the first question. Taxi firms tend to be very similar to one another, okay? And so as a result of that, they are differentiated, but not to any great degree. Okay, so the next thing I'd like you to do then, folks, and this is going to involve a little bit of reading for you, and I think we might actually leave it at that point, although having said that, we might actually also look at barriers to entry. We'll see how we get on. So in this instance then, there is an article on page 32 and page 33, so it's a couple of pages long, and then there are some questions for you to answer, 5 questions for you to answer. Okay, now what this does is give you quite a nice summary in terms of the issues around samey chains, and in this case, the reasons why in some cases monopolistic competition can be a bit of an issue, and in this instance, I'd like you to have a read of that article, highlight the bits that you think are particularly relevant, and then have a go at answering those questions. There are 5 questions. List the benefits and costs of being a chain restaurant. Explain why restaurants may be an example of monopolistic competition. Using examples, explain how the costs below have changed, fixed costs and variable costs. State what has happened to consumer demand, and then draw a cost and revenue diagram to demonstrate the impact of the changes in costs and demand. So it's applying a little bit of theory to the article, and using some of that article to evidence and support your answer. Okay, so it's good practice for when we come to do data response questions. Okay, so I'm going to leave you some time to have a go at that. I think probably, given what we've gone through and given the principles of monopolistic competition and the short run and long run diagrams, and maybe there's some reading around that to make sure that you completely understand it, I think we may well stop at that point, to be honest. So I'm going to stop there, and then what we'll do is finish off the next presentation on barriers to entry. We haven't mentioned that once or twice before, but we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. So we're only really dealing with the principles of what we talked about, being able to put the diagrammatic illustrations and explain those, put those together, and also then take a look at a typical data response question. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, and we'll move on to barriers to entry for the next presentation. Okay, thank you for listening.